Hey everyone, my name is Fariel and I'm a licensed U.S. and Canadian immigration lawyer. I created this channel to bring you the most up-to-date information on Canadian and U.S. immigration laws and updates. This is an extremely difficult time for everyone, and I hope you are all staying healthy and all your loved ones are also being safe and healthy. Just this morning, on March 18th, 2020, President Trump and Prime Minister Trudeau agreed to close the U.S.-Canadian border. This is the first time this has happened since 1867. Both Trudeau and Trump have agreed that non-essential travel to the U.S. or Canada is prohibited right now. Canada now has closed this border to anyone who is a non-citizen, non-permanent resident, or immediate relative for non-essential travel, which includes recreation, tourism, and shopping. There are exceptions for air crews and diplomats, and essential travel requiring food to be brought across the border, or fuel, or any essential healthcare supplies. Confirmation of the closure has not been formally announced yet, but Prime Minister Trudeau has urged all Canadians to return back home. What is so surprising about this is the restriction of Canadians to cross into the U.S. and for Americans to cross into Canada, because this is something that has been unheard of since the Confederation of 1867. Now, what does this mean for the immigration realm? How does it affect immigration as it stands right now? So with the closure of the borders, foreign nationals who are in the U.S. and also Americans are not able to come into Canada. So therefore, those on temporary work permits, student permits, or visitor visas will not be able to come into Canada. Now, looking at this, we know that this is for the health and safety of all Canadians, but it puts a big predicament on temporary workers or students who have gone to the U.S. or gone abroad on vacation for March break, etc., and are trying to come back into Canada. In addition, Canada has closed down all its major airports except for 4 in Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto Pearson, and Montreal. Things have been moving so quickly and changing daily, if not hourly, that we don't really have the correct information on what is available, what's not available, what is permitted and what is not permitted. What we have is what the Prime Minister has announced, and also what Immigration Canada, IRCC, has published on its website, which is not very much. Now, there have been updates on the temporary permit route and also the permanent residency route, which I'm going to explain to you right now and let you know what's going on so you can take the necessary precautions and follow exactly what is required right now. As of now, we have not received any notice of any program closures. Express entry is still going on. IRCC is still accepting applications. The provinces are still accepting applications, even for temporary foreign workers and study permits. There has been no notification that any of the programs into Canada, temporary or permanent, have been closed. So that's good news for all intents purposes, because at least we know that everything is still moving on regardless of how everything is being affected in the economy, and how government agencies and other agencies, other employers and organizations have to be quarantined and shut down. We know that Canada still has a mandate to bring in 1 million immigrants, and they're still working on this. Yes, there might be a delay and there might be some hiccups along the line, because the COVID-19 is something completely unforeseen. We never expected anything like this. There are always changes to programs, but with a complete shutdown of the borders, of the international borders, this is something that was not expected by any one of us. So anything that we can do to help other people, as lawyers, we want to do this. We want to help you. We want to help you get your application in. We want you to, have a future and be able to say that Canada is my home now, because I was one of those 1 million immigrants that Canada introduced, within their mandate and their immigration programs. As I mentioned earlier, temporary work permit holders and student work permit holders are not able to enter Canada right now. So what is the recommendation? Well, the recommendation is that if you are on a temporary visa in Canada, just stay in Canada. Do not leave, because if you are here, you can still maintain your status. You can request for an extension if you are going to be falling out of status soon. And if you are out of status, you could also request a restoration, which would put you back into lawful status again. Another update that we've received is that with temporary visas as well as permanent visa applications, the IRCC government is also providing a 90-day extension to provide any documents. So what does that mean? That means go ahead and file your application with a letter of explanation on why you can't submit the required information, because IRCC understands that there's a lot of service disruptions. There are a lot of government agencies that are closed right now or quarantined. Schools are closed, so it's kind of difficult to get your transcripts sent to education evaluators or your degree sent. There's also been, we've also received notification from U.S., which is one of the largest education evaluators, that there is a significant delay in providing education evaluations. So typically, when somebody files for permanent residency, they do so under the express entry pathway, or they find another provincial nomination pathway or pilot program to apply to. So the permanent residency part does not come until the end. Right now, IRCC has not announced any suspension for any programs, including the express entry, and none of the provinces have announced any closures of any of the pathways. So it's business as usual with regards to applying for that first step of your permanent residency. So what would be recommended? The recommended course is to go ahead and apply for express entry, and then maybe your enhanced provincial nomination or your non-enhanced provincial nomination, and go ahead and get your application in, because like I said, typically that would take about 8 months or so. Now with the delay of the education evaluators, also taking into account that many language testing centers are going to be closed, there's going to be even more of a delay than 8 months. Now, we don't know what's going to happen 8 months from now. We don't know whether we are still going to be quarantined or whether the borders will still be closed. So it's a good idea to be proactive and get your application in, especially since IRCC does understand. They do understand that there are factors right now beyond your control where you can't get the documents required in and you require additional time. So this is why the 90 days has been implemented for both temporary and permanent applications if there is any request for additional information. But make sure that there is a letter of explanation, because if there isn't, then you run the risk of your application being denied, and nobody wants that. Nobody wants to start at the beginning again, especially if they're already in the middle or almost at the end, or they've been approved and they've received an invitation to apply. So now, what about those who have already received their invitation to apply, have already applied for permanent residency, or even under the family route have received a confirmation of permanent residency and they have to land in Canada? Well, Earlier this week, there was a memo that said that all landed appointments would no longer be in person and they would be by phone. But currently, with the situation with all the borders being closed right now to all countries with Canada, there hasn't been any movement with the confirmation of permanent residence. So therefore, we are holding back a little bit. What I mean by that is to say, if you do have a ticket that is booked to come to Canada and you have your confirmation of permanent residence, it would be a good idea to put that on hold, because at the moment there are no program guidelines on how that is going to be tackled or how they're going to work with people who have the confirmation of permanent residence and need to come to Canada to land. Because typically, just because you have a confirmation of permanent residence, you're not a landed permanent resident yet until you actually have that dialogue with the official and you are actually approved and stamped and everything. So in other words, just hold on to that. There is a web application form that you can submit in and advise that you're not going to be traveling, so they do have notice at IRCC. It should be announced very shortly within the next coming days how IRCC is going to deal with these applications and how people can land into Canada or not land into Canada, or extensions available. Everything will be coming. We just have to be a little bit patient with everything, because right now there isn't much information. And when we received the memo this morning and the press conference regarding the closure of the U.S.-Canada border, it was a shock to us all. We couldn't believe it, because now even U.S. citizens who are on TN, if they leave Canada and they're in the U.S., they may have difficulty. Now, we're not saying that they will, but they may, and it's really up to the border official to determine whether that person can come in or not. Now, if they've been denied for any reason and we can make an argument, that would be up to the lawyer. And your best bet is to hire the services of a licensed lawyer who can adjudicate for you, who can advocate for you, who knows the law, who knows the specific borders and knows what's going on and understands everything, and could present the best argument forward to have you fulfill whatever your intention is going to be. If there are temporary residents residing in the U.S., we're still unclear on whether you can return back to Canada. So at the moment, if you do go to the border and you try to enter on your existing visa, you may be denied entry. So just keep your eyes posted. We will post as soon as we hear anything. It'll be on our website. The link is below. Instagram, Facebook, and we'll have everything posted as soon as we hear any further information. Now, as far as applicants outside Canada applying for temporary work permit or study permit or visitor visa, I would still recommend you to get your application in and request, if there is a request for additional information, there is that 90-day period where you can provide the documents in. I would still suggest to get that application in at the moment, because right now we do not have any guidance on whether these applications are going to be denied. So if we don't have any evidence to the contrary, we should just proceed and move on and start applying for all the applications that are necessary. And again, I recommend going forward with it and just getting your application for study permit, because, for example, a study permit, because the application deadlines may be coming up and slots are getting filled for international students. So getting your application in will at least provide you some time to think about your future and what you need to do. again, with the current state of everything is really up in the air. Everything keeps changing, keeps moving. So we just have to keep up to date and keep apprised of everything so we can provide the best and most accurate information to the public. Now, the only problem with this is that there are many visa application centers globally that are closed right now and are quarantined. So Canadian visa application centers are contracted with the government, so they're not really government employees. However, their contract allows them to process the applications and get all the documents in. But if they're not open, then you're not able to submit your application because there's nobody there to accept it. So of course that is going to cause some issues. And right now, currently, there's about 13 visa application centers that are closed. So I would closely monitor that and take a look at the website and find out which application centers are closed. And if you are living in one of those areas, then at least you would know whether or not you should or should not proceed with your application. IRCC has also canceled all appointments for refugee, for citizenship tests. For refugees, the only in-person applications are being accepted right now. So any appointments are canceled until April 13th, 2020, which also includes the citizenship tests. During this time, citizenship ceremonies will also not be conducted as well. Now, updates to U.S. law are somewhat different. So because Canada has a huge immigration push, which I believe you know is the 1 million new immigrants are slated to come into Canada, and and Canada's increasing all of its resources to bring in more immigrants into the country. U.S. is somewhat different. So in the US, in order to immigrate, you would require most of the time employer sponsorship. And most of the employer sponsorship occurs after you have been on H-1B visa, which is a temporary work visa. Now, after you've been on the H-1B, if your employer is happy with your work and wants to sponsor you for a green card, they submit what we call a PERM application, where you prove that there are no qualified US workers who could perform the job. Now, in the US right now, there are some memos and updates from the Department of Labor and the Department of State and United States Immigration Services. Another difference between Canada and the US, apart from their immigration programs, is the way that they are dealing with the travel ban and the coronavirus. So whereas Canada is pretty much closing the borders to all countries, the U.S. has closed its borders. Of course, we know it's the U.S.-Canada border, but also they are closing they're imposing an international ban for the impacted coronavirus or CO COVID-19 impacted countries, which includes China, Iran, UK, Ireland, and several other European countries. And basically, travel between US and those countries is not permissible right now. And US citizens or permanent residents or immediate relatives who have been to one of those affected areas, when they come back to the US, they have to travel into one of the 13 airports which have been designated with enhanced screening. Now, the enhanced screening is there to make sure that the U.S. citizen, permanent resident, or immediate relative is coming into the U.S. and not spreading the virus, and that they have it under containment. So that includes taking their temperature, monitoring their medical history, and just providing them with literature and information if they do pass all those screening tests. Now, they would be in quarantine self-quarantine for 14 days. And after the 14 days, there would be public health officials that would come to check up on them just to make sure that they have self-quarantine and that they have not done anything that was prohibited when they were entering the U.S. Now, requests for exceptions to the travel restriction for the U.S. and the impacted COVID-19 areas, there may be an exception that could be filed, but that has to be filed with the embassy or the consulate, and you have to prove some extraordinary reasons or exigent circumstances why the foreign national should be allowed to enter the U.S. So in the U.S. there are possibilities for a so-called waiver with the consulate or the embassy. Now, this is something that should be written by somebody that knows the laws. So again, I would highly recommend seeking the services of a trained immigration lawyer to go through the pros and the cons and to see if there's any grounds for you to request such a exception. Now, as I mentioned earlier about the H-1B program, which is typically the program most foreign national workers, skilled workers go through in order to get permanent residence in the United States. So the H-1B program has a lot of rules and regulations that have to be met by United States Immigration Service, as well as in conjunction with the Department of Labor. Now, with the coronavirus and the quarantines that are happening right now with a lot of employer premises, there was question as to whether H-1B employees could actually work from home. Now, that is completely permissible, so there is no issue if the H-1B worker has to self-quarantine themselves and work from home. Their H-1B won't be at risk. So I know I've provided you with a lot of information, which is a wealth of information on both Canada and the U.S. and the impact of COVID-19 from a U.S. and Canadian immigration lawyer's perspective. So these are my takeaways now for my final thoughts with you. If you are a temporary resident and you are in Canada, do not leave Canada. Stay in Canada. File an extension if necessary. File a restoration application if necessary. Just remain in Canada so you are not at jeopardy of being denied entry if you leave. Now, by leaving, what I mean is exiting and trying to re-enter again to extend your visa or for another purpose, which we call this flagpoling. Now, we've had reports that many foreign nationals have been denied entry for flagpoling. So I would highly recommend that everybody, just if you're in Canada, just stay in Canada if your intention is to remain in Canada. Now, another thing I want to stress, and I highly stress, is that if you are interested in filing an application for either a temporary visa or a permanent resident visa in Canada under, for example, express entry or provincial domination or a study permit or a temporary work permit, I would still recommend that you file your application, get your documents compiled, get everything together. Because like I mentioned earlier, there is currently a huge delay because of all the government agencies that are quarantined at the moment. So you want to get your application in as soon as possible. Don't hesitate. Don't wait. Consult a lawyer. We would also be happy to help you with any questions you have or any concerns that you may have. Another takeaway I would highly recommend is that if you do have an application in queue and you do get a request for additional information, do not forget to submit a letter of explanation in when you submit your application, and go ahead and submit your application. But do not forget to put a letter of explanation. Most attorneys will do this automatically because they know what's going on and they know what is required right now, and with the urgency of applications just getting filed, even with the 90-day clock ticking, you want to be able to take advantage of that, because we don't know what is going to happen tomorrow. We don't know what is going to happen next week. Everything keeps changing. And this is something that I have stressed always. I travel internationally a lot, and when I meet with clients, what I do tell them is I never guarantee an acceptance, or this is not something that I do. However, I do recommend that you get your application in as soon as possible, because programs are constantly changing and we don't know what the next program will be, or when it will be shut down, or if express entry points would skyrocket high. But what we know is what the rules are at the moment and what we have seen, precedent. We look at that and we see what's regularly being pulled, and that's how we recommend services to our clients. So again, get your application in, consult with an attorney, a licensed attorney if you need to, because that will assure that you will get your documents in on time. Your documents will be completed by a professional. They will be looked over, and you can have that added guarantee that everything has been looked over with a fine, with a final eye. If you have any questions, just comment below and I will make sure to respond to you. I look at all my comments and I make sure to respond to everybody who asks a question. If you found this video informative, please subscribe to my channel below and like me on Instagram and Facebook.